First and foremost, I guess, an interrogation of this real-life event that happened in 2008. There was a global financial crisis, and I think I was first really interested when it was actually the director, Andrew Panton, who came to me with the idea, and I get really excited about doing real-life stories and politics and social issues. So I'd always wanted to look at this big financial crash that completely nearly brought capitalism to its knees in 2008. And it was really interesting to me that I always thought of it as quite an American story. Whenever you look at images of that time or other films and art about the crash, they're always sort of set on Wall Street and in New York, and it feels very American. But actually, the deliciousness of this story for me is it feels like a very Scottish story. The amazingness that at the time, the biggest bank in the world was Scottish. It was in Edinburgh, the Royal Bank of Scotland. And we had a Scottish Prime Minister, we had a Scottish Chancellor, and actually at its heart, capitalism itself, free markets and all that is almost a Scottish idea. It dates back 300 years ago to the Enlightenment and this economist called Adam Smith. So all of that just made me think, gosh, what a really exciting way to look at something that feels quite global, but is actually can be made more sense of if you look at it through a very Scottish lens. Every play, I think, is different in terms of how you approach it, but once you have the main idea, once you know roughly what the subject matter is, what your story is, what the themes and issues, what your anxieties are that you want to explore in the play, then obviously you just have all of these questions. It's like option paralysis. Do I make it a one-person show or 50 people? Do I make it 10 minutes or I make it 10 hours? What's the style? What's the tone? So you just have to sort of interrogate all that. And I generally find that the story itself, the content, will reveal to itself what the best or what the most exciting to you kind of tone and style is. And with Make It Happen, we knew that there was going to be a sort of ghost-like figure in it, the apparition of this economist, which I think then gave me permission for it to feel a bit more magic realist, so not too serious, not too naturalistic, a bit more playful. And then I also kept thinking about Edinburgh. Like, Edinburgh is a really old city anyway. It is haunted, some people think, by ghosts of the past, and it's got all this sort of Gothic and neoclassical Greek vibes about it. So with me and the director, we liked it very early on that it should maybe have a kind of Greek chorus feel, a kind of epic feel. So all of that mythic stuff started to guide slightly the tone of it and the style of it. And then little stupid things came along. I kept thinking, wouldn't it be great to have the Greek chorus maybe sing to lift what could be a very dry play about banking? And so we discovered with our musical partners all these songs from 2008 and gave them some choral vibes and that kind of thing. So yeah, myth, legend, ghosts, Greek, epic kind of magic realist feel started to emerge as I was writing the play. I think I first started speaking to our director Andrew about 2 years before we hit the stage. And some of those early months, those first 6 months, are you just thinking, writing notes. Sometimes in my life, you're doing other projects as well, so you have to balance getting those finished when you're starting new ones. Then we did a whole series of research, actually. We went and conducted about 3 or 4 weeks of interviews with former bankers, people who used to work at Royal Bank of Scotland. We spoke to journalists, academics, politicians, former chancellors, civil servants in Downing Street, MSPs up in Edinburgh, just to get a whole three-dimensional view of what it was like to be in the banking system in Edinburgh in 2008. And that took ages, but that was great. I loved all that stuff. That I feel like you get so many scene ideas, line ideas, sometimes joke ideas from having those conversations. And then you just begin. I mean, I actually tried to write my first drafts quite quickly, and I sort of allow themselves to be quite bad, and hopefully they get better. You'll be the judge. But I go quite quickly for one first offer just to make loads of really bold, ambitious, probably wrong ideas. Because I feel like staring at a blank page is the most frightening thing, actually. So just put something down, be happy that it's going to be wrong. It's always a bit better than you think it's going to be. It reveals new ideas to you as you go. So I shared that draft with Andrew and a few other people, a few of our creatives, like a designer and our musical composer. And then the second draft is where I sort of calm down and really start to enjoy it. You've got more of a sense of the structure, you've had feedback, so you think you know your play a bit more. And that may be a few months, that sort of writing and rewriting those next drafts. Often I think when you're drafting, sometimes it's the balance of where your attention is focused, where you want your audience to look. So I remember the very first draft, was mainly all about the Bank of Scotland world and Fred Goodwin and Edinburgh. There's a political side to the story as well, which is Gordon Brown and Westminster and their response to how they saved the banks, how they bailed out the economy. And that was only a very small part of it, but actually the more I drafted it, the more I felt like it needed more focus on that side of the story, just to give the slightly more magic, boisterous song, dance, comic world of the Edinburgh story, to give it sort of more grounding and more weight and give it some political, historical context as well. So that emerged stronger. You go back and forth with your team as well. I kept throwing in song ideas and then we'd hear them in a room. I'd go, what about Kylie Minogue? And they go, that's terrible, or what about da-da-da, and that's great. So you start to hear the sound of your play a bit as well. Equally, we worked with a great choreographer, and EJ, she tried to help me tell the story sometimes with dance and movement. So sometimes you go, oh great, I can actually delete that line or delete that scene because we're going to tell that through physicality instead of dialogue. So you're with a great team and always sort of navigating as a group what is dialogue, what is music, what is dance, what can we tell with lighting, what can we tell with video projection. So it just evolves like that. It's not like writing a novel where you're just on your own, in your own head. You really are working as a team and it's incredibly collaborative. There's a moment in rehearsal I always find, particularly with a new play, where it's quite helpful for the writer to step out for a little bit, like normally about end of week 2, week 3, because those first 2 weeks you're with the cast and the director and there are loads of questions about the script and you're sometimes doing rewrites based on what you've done in the room or what discoveries you've made in the room. You come in with some new pages and try those out. But eventually it's a bit like the company of actors has to take ownership of it eventually and take ownership of their characters. So having you there all the time helping them or filling in the gaps isn't always helpful. So that I enjoy that period, and then you come back in the 4th week or something and it's amazing. It's like these characters have come to life and without you being there, and it's really extraordinary. And then I find the preview period when you first do your show for audiences but you're still working on it every day, that's great because you've actually got a crowd in the house and they're laughing or sometimes they're not laughing and you go, why is that? And you really learn from the room the bits that need work. I write up until press night and opening. And then I guess arguably then that should be done, but then weirdly the conversation begins locally, nationally, in the theatre, in newspapers, on radio, on YouTube. You find yourself constantly talking about it, and that's really brilliant, and people giving you feedback about what it means to them. And especially if it's a political play, people are talking about the politics of it and what does it mean and what can we learn from it. So you don't want to absent yourself from that. That's when it gets really exciting. For 2 years ago, it was just in your head, and now hundreds of people are talking about it and you want to be in that conversation. So I'm not sure if it ever really ends for a playwright, and that's both exhausting, but also it's a great, what a privilege to be able to keep talking about your show. History plays, history stories, history films are always really interesting in the sense that I think they probably should kind of try to exist on their own terms. Like you should be able to write it, and if you were alive or if you weren't alive, if it was performed now or performed in 200 years, it should still sort of work as a basic story with a beginning, a middle and an end, and a character arc, and discoveries and changes and surprises and twists. And it'd be more sort of universally about what is the human condition? Why do we do things to each other? Why do we fall in love? Why do we hate? Why do our systems of finance collapse for some reason? But I guess I felt really urgently that it was quite relevant to be looking at it now, because it's getting on to, in 2025, it's getting on to 17 years since this happened, this crash. And I feel, and I think a lot of people feel, that we are basically still much in the legacy, in the shadow of that event. Normally in the past, if you look at history of the last 100 years, when there are these big seismic events, there was a crash in 1929 called the Wall Street crash, which is where the Great Gatsby's all story told around. And there was a huge political, cultural shift, economic shift after that point. They was going in that way, and then they went for a different model. Similarly, at the end of the Second World War, or the collapse of the Berlin Wall and Russia, normally these big events in history lead to an entirely new shift, a different way of running your economy, or a different cultural, social kind of contract with people. And I just don't think that happened for some reason in 2008. It felt like we are still limping on, crawling with the same legacy, the same economic model, the same political consensus that came out of that moment. And it feels very frustrating. I think people feel very trapped and stagnant and frustrated about how unambitious and how slow we're moving as a society now. So I just wanted to understand that moment more and what it revealed about our systems of government, how powerful these bankers got and how weak our politicians got very briefly, and how no new idea, no new story for Britain or the Western world came out of that crash. Basically, the reset button was pressed and nothing changed. It's like it wasn't connected. And I find that then goes on to, for me, to explain so much that came after it, whether it's Brexit, whether it's populism, Donald Trump, anything like that. You know, the slight craziness that came out of that was because of the unsatisfying way in which we answered or didn't answer what happened in 2008. I think there's lots of themes in Make It Happen. There's some really sort of overt, direct ones. We obviously look at money. What is money? What is this strange thing we have that orders most of our world, how we get paid, how we buy goods, how that affects class, status, power. But I guess I'm also interested in like a really longer view of stuff. So we have a theme in the play which is about impact. I took and ran with this idea along with our designer that Edinburgh itself is unique architecture in the middle of this volcano that's now dormant, but you know, it so characterises the feeling of Edinburgh. How land masses over time, tectonic plates hit each other and form crags and rocks and things. And the idea that the places where we live, the origins of that go back millions and millions and millions of years. And I guess I like that idea in the sense that it reminds you that we arrive, our time on Earth is so short comparatively, so what do you do with that time? And we have a character called Fred Goodwin who became, from a very unusual background, a working class council estate kid, had the most impact probably on Scotland, on Britain and maybe the world in terms of what he did. And probably not for the good either, you would argue. I mean, what he did was basically nearly destroy the economy of Great Britain, and we're still suffering under that right now. So there's something about that, there's something about whether you look back millions of years to glaciers and volcanoes and plates, or you look back 300 years to an idea from an economist that still pervades to this day, or you look today and what did I do today and how did that impact the world, how did it impact someone's behaviour, someone's happiness, someone's sadness. I think all those ideas of consequence and impact, they all sort of come a lot from Adam Smith in his books, his idea on human behaviour and how we all affect each other and the world around us. I think that was a theme I tried to get both in dialogue, but also sort of imagery, poetry, and then embedded into the look of the production as well. I do a lot of real life stories on stage and screen, so I've sort of developed a rough formula about how to approach them, but it changes every single time. But I guess I have really sort of basic principles and rules. Like one of them would be, even if you're dealing with potentially someone quite unsympathetic, maybe, who's not immediately likeable, or their story feels like they're just going to be painted as a villain. So Fred Goodwin, in real life, some people would argue, is not the easiest a person to sympathise with because of what he did, because of what he destroyed, greed, selfishness, arguably, and because of the kind of character he is. He's a very difficult, in the play, people find him difficult to get close to and to like. And so you know, as a writer, you inherit this as your character going, oh God, how am I going to make him big? How am I going to make him engaged and interesting? And I think it's just basic principles, whether you're making a character up or you're dealing with a real life person. I was always told basically you have to ask sort of 3 questions. What does your character want? What's stopping them from getting it? And so how do they go about getting it? And just asking those 3 really obvious questions, you start to humanize them. You start to try to understand their motivation, what's driving them, what they're struggling with. And I think an audience does that as well. It's a very empathetic exercise watching a play, because even if it's a really unsympathetic person, like in Shakespeare, Macbeth, you know, people who are monstrous, you're going, but why? What would you want? What are you struggling with? What's the thing in your head that you're wrestling with? What does that say about human nature? I think it naturally makes potentially unsympathetic people in the news or on social media feel more relatable when you put them in a story. So I try to be as generous as I possibly can to my characters. I don't want to be unfair to the real life people. I don't want to misrepresent unwillingly my real life people. I don't try not to come in with like an agenda. I don't want to come in with like a political agenda. I'm going to take your real story and corrupt it with my own politics. I don't want to do that. I just want to present them quite neutrally and have the audience make their own viewpoints on that. But I also feel like these are big public stories. This happened in the world. This story belongs to me, it belongs to you, it belongs to everybody. This happened to us, and we have a right to try and explore it and interrogate it. I think I tried to behave well. I tried to go, well, I'm going to let them know in advance that I'm going to write to them. If they have questions for me, they can ask me. If they want to meet me, they can meet me. I'll ask to meet them. And then you just try to be as transparent and honest all the way through, and not deliberately misrepresent them. And also, like theatre, even though it's, the play is on and it's running and it'll kind of be there forever, but also it's theatre, like it always does, it can evolve and change. And if I meet someone after they've watched my play, it has happened in the past, they come and they tell me something and they go, actually you missed this bit and actually this might be quite good, and you learn things, and then when you go again, because you can go again with theatre, you might want to incorporate some of that stuff. So it's a bit like, it's almost like an algorithm that is learning all the time. People feed in their own bits of code and it keeps growing and changing even after you've put it on stage. So in some ways, meeting the real people when they've seen it, they can help you more specifically to improve your play. We didn't want it to be a musical, so obviously in musicals the lyrics are very specific and they try to move the story forward. We thought that these songs were more about vibes, basically, atmosphere, themes. I mean, not too literal with the lyrics, but hear little words that ping out here and then. But mainly it was about atmosphere, like what do we want the energy to feel like in this particular moment? Is it positive and propulsive? Are we rattling through the project that we've just started at RBS, or is it more reflective and somber and more ghost-like? And in a way that was Martin Lowe, our musical supervisor, he orchestrated all of these pop songs and rock songs from the 2000s to help the mood, I guess, as we navigate through, again, a very complex and sometimes dry and cold world of money and banking, to just make the audience feel something like I feel excited, or I feel worried, or I feel scared now. And the songs are mainly picked for that, so not the literal lyrics necessarily, but just the vibes. Our lead actor, Brian Cox, he is a big Adam Smith fan, and he believes that Smith has been misinterpreted and weaponized by different factions, mainly on the political right, conservatism and neoliberalism, that they use Adam Smith to justify deregulating businesses or not taxing businesses or reducing the role of the state, when actually his view, and now my view, is that that wasn't what he was saying at all. He believed in society and he believed in collectivism and communities. He just believed that the free market was better than having tariffs, which we now have. So a reappraisal of Smith, I think, is quite fun. But ultimately, I guess it's always, I think, a valuable exercise to look at moments in our recent past and use that as a way of making sense of where we are now. And I think if it just does a little bit of that, then that's great. I'm getting tired and I need somewhere to begin, somewhere to begin.